She went to the event to support her husband, but she became the target of humiliation in front of the elite. The wine-stained dress sealed the complicit silence of a room full of power. But what was humiliation became a headline, and his empire began to crumble before the cameras. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Friday afternoon settled over New York City like a heavy blanket of exhaustion and melancholy. The sky, tinged with shades of orange and grey, reflected the weariness of the city that never sleeps, that pulses without rest, that swallows people into its frantic routine without asking if they're ready for another day. Sarah Miller sat in the armchair in her bedroom, her hands resting gently on her 7-month pregnant belly, feeling the delicate movements of the daughter growing inside her. Every kick, every stir, was a reminder that a new life depended on her, that soon she would be responsible not just for herself, but for a completely helpless being who would look to her for protection, love, and security. The week had been brutal. Endless meetings. At the headquarters of the Haven Project, the non-profit she had founded 8 years ago, with nothing but determination and a nearly empty bank account. The pile of documents waiting for her review never seemed to shrink. Case reports, financial statements for donors, expansion proposals pending approval, stories of women in desperate situations arriving every day asking for help. Constant calls from abandoned pregnant women, homeless, without resources, without hope. Sarah welcomed each story with an open heart, listened to every tear, offered every word of comfort she could. But it all took a toll. It weighed on her shoulders, which already carried the burden of her advanced pregnancy, and on her soul, which tried to stay strong while her own personal life was silently falling apart. And now, on this Friday that should have been sacred, a moment of well-deserved rest after a week that had left her physically and emotionally drained, she found herself facing an invitation, or rather, an obligation, that she desperately wanted to refuse. The ivory dress was laid out on the bed, like a silent promise of a night she didn't want to live. It was beautiful, no doubt. A light fabric that slid through her, fingers like silk, an impeccable cut that flattered her figure without being tight, an elegant ankle length, a discreet neckline that respected the sobriety the occasion demanded. Simple in its essence, but sophisticated in its details. Appropriate for a pregnant woman who needed to navigate the New York business elite without drawing too much attention, without looking sloppy, without giving anyone a reason to cast disapproving glances. Sarah looked at it with a tumultuous mix of resignation and apprehension. She didn't want to go. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to stay home, to lie down in her soft bed, to put her feet up, to rest while she still could. Her body was begging for a break. Her legs were more swollen than ever. Her ankles seemed to have doubled in size, and the bulging veins ached with an intensity that made her want to cry whenever she stood for too long. Her back ached in a way that seemed endless, a constant heavy pain that radiated from the base of her spine up to her shoulders. The enormous belly pulled her down, destabilizing her every move, turning simple gestures like getting up from a chair into small victories. And there was the exhaustion, that deep exhaustion of someone carrying a life inside them, of someone sharing every drop of energy with another being, of someone who could barely sleep because finding a comfortable position had become an impossible mission. But Ethan had insisted. It hadn't been a loving invitation, nor a gentle suggestion. It had been a demand disguised as a request. The corporate gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel was important, he had said in that tone that brooked no argument. Influential business leaders would be there. International investors he had been cultivating for months. Opinion makers who could open doors or shut down opportunities. Her presence by his side, the devoted and pregnant wife, would make a difference to the carefully constructed image he presented to the corporate world. The narrative of the family man, the successful executive who balanced career and personal life, the future father who was building an empire to leave as a legacy. It was a narrative they were building together, or rather, one that he was building, and she was just a prop for, an extra in his success story. A decorative piece that validated the image he wanted to project. Sarah sighed deeply, a sigh that seemed to carry not just the fatigue of that day, but the accumulation of months of disappointment, frustration, and silence. 5 years of marriage, and she still couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, the precise day, the specific conversation when it all started to fall apart. It hadn't been a sudden collapse, a dramatic explosion, a catastrophic event that marked the end. It had been a slow, gradual erosion, almost imperceptible at first. Like water dripping incessantly on a stone, wearing it down millimeter by millimeter until one day it splits in two, and no one can explain exactly when the damage became irreversible. In the beginning, everything was different. Ethan was attentive in a way that made her feel special, valued, loved. He would come home with flowers for no reason, just because he saw a beautiful bouquet and thought of her. He would ask about her day with genuine interest, wanting to know every detail about her work at the foundation, fascinated by the stories of resilience she told, moved when she described the gratitude of the women who had been helped. He seemed truly proud of her, of the determined woman, by his side, of the wife who wasn't content to just spend money and go to spas, who dedicated every day of her life to turning resources into hope for thousands of vulnerable families, who saw beyond the walls of her own privileged reality and extended a hand to those who needed it most. They would talk for hours, about everything and nothing, about his dreams of expanding the business, of proving to his father that he could be more than just another executive in the family company, of building something truly significant, about her dreams of growing the foundation, of opening new branches in other cities, of creating a support network so vast that no at-risk pregnant woman in the country would be left without help. They dreamed together, made plans for the future, imagined what it would be like to have children one day, to build a family, to put down deep roots while supporting each other's ambitions. But gradually, so slowly she almost didn't notice, his interest began to fade like water slipping through her fingers. The conversations became shorter, more superficial, filled with uncomfortable pauses and distracted glances. His gaze grew more distant, looking through her, without really seeing her, as if she were part of the furniture, present but irrelevant. The gestures of affection became rarer, more mechanical, devoid of the warm spontaneity they used to have. The goodnight kiss turned into an empty ritual, a fulfillment of a marital obligation. The tight hug before sleep gave way to bodies that barely touched in the king-size bed, each on their own side, separated by an invisible but absolutely real chasm. In recent months, especially after the pregnancy was confirmed, the distance had become an abyss so wide that Sarah sometimes wondered if there was still a bridge that could reconnect them. Ethan spent more and more time at the office, always with the excuse of important meetings, urgent projects, delicate negotiations that couldn't wait. He traveled frequently, sometimes giving only a few hours' notice, returning days later without convincing explanations of where he had been or with whom. He came home late, usually after she was already in bed, too exhausted to talk, just needing to shower and collapse. And when she tried to start a serious conversation, when she gathered the courage to say that something was wrong, that they needed to reconnect, that a baby was on the way, and they needed to solve their problems before she was born, he would deflect the subject with impressive skill, changing the topic so smoothly she barely noticed, leaving her talking to herself until she got tired and gave up, or he would simply invent an excuse and leave the house, leaving her with the words dying on her lips and her heart breaking a little more each time. The pregnancy intensified everything in a way Sarah had never imagined. She had hoped, with the naivety of someone who still believes in fairy tales, that the news they were going to be parents would bring them closer. She imagined that the confirmation of a life growing inside her would awaken in Ethan that instinctive tenderness, that desire to protect and care, that excitement for the future they would share as a family. When she took the pregnancy test and saw the positive result, she cried with emotion, imagining how she would tell him, visualizing his joyful reaction, the tight hug, the plans they would make together. She prepared a special dinner, lit candles, chose the perfect moment. And when she finally said the words, when she revealed she was pregnant, his reaction was so different from what she had expected that she was shocked. Ethan froze for a moment. He just looked at her without saying anything, his face completely expressionless. Then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said it was great news, that they would need to get organized, that there was a lot to do. There was no joy, no hug, no kiss. Just that cold, calculated, distant reaction. And since then, it seemed that her growing belly, instead of bringing them closer, was building an ever higher wall between them. Ethan avoided touching her, looked away when she changed clothes, never asked how she was feeling, if the baby was kicking, if she had chosen a name. It was as if the pregnancy was an inconvenience he preferred to ignore until it became impossible. And then there was that strange conversation 2 weeks ago, that moment that kept bothering Sarah, that wouldn't leave her in peace even when she tried to convince herself she was overreacting, that it was just the heightened sensitivity of pregnancy creating problems where none existed. She was exhausted that day, more than usual. A serious crisis had erupted at the foundation. One of the main donors, a tech company that had supported the project for 3 years, had decided to cut funding without warning. The news came via a cold, direct email with no satisfactory explanation. And that cut meant that dozens of women would be left without services, that essential programs would have to be suspended, that people who depended on that help would be left to fend for themselves. Sarah spent the entire day trying to find solutions, making calls to other potential donors, reorganizing budgets, cutting expenses, desperate not to have to turn anyone away. When she got home, she was on the verge of an emotional breakdown. She collapsed on the sofa and started to cry, an uncontrollable sobbing she couldn't stop. It wasn't just about the foundation, although that was serious. It was everything. The crumbling marriage, the husband who treated her as if she were invisible, the loneliness she felt even while married, the fear of the future, the uncertainty of how she would raise a daughter alone if Ethan decided to leave. It all came pouring out in those tears that soaked the sofa. That's when Ethan came, home earlier than usual. He walked in, saw her crying, and for a brief moment she thought he would show some empathy, some affection, some genuine interest in what was troubling her. But instead of sitting next to her, instead of asking what had happened, instead of offering the shoulder she so desperately needed, he went upstairs and came back minutes later with a folder of documents. He sat in the armchair across from her, not beside her, and opened the folder with a serious expression. "Sarah, we need to sort this out now," he said bluntly. "I brought some documents that need your signature." She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying, confused. "What documents?" "It's just a formality," he explained in that executive voice he used for business presentations. "A restructuring of our assets that my lawyer recommended. It's to protect our estate, to ensure the couple's assets are secure in case something happens to either of us. With the baby coming, we need to think about the future, have everything legally organized." Sarah was in no condition to process complex information at that moment. Her head ached, her eyes burned, her heart was shattered. She looked at the papers he placed on the coffee table, tried to read, but the letters danced in front of her, blurred by tears. There were many pages, filled with incomprehensible legal terms, clauses and sub-clauses she had no energy to decipher. "I trust you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "If your lawyer said it's necessary, then it's fine." Ethan already had a pen ready. He handed it to her, pointing to the places where she should sign. Sarah signed where he told her to, her vision blurred by tears, her mind clouded by emotional exhaustion, her fingers trembling as she held the pen. There were several signatures, several pages. She didn't even know exactly what she was signing, trusting that her husband wouldn't harm her, that if he said it was a formality, then that's all it was. When she finished, Ethan quickly put the documents back in the folder, as if he were in a hurry to make them disappear. He gave her a cold, quick kiss on the forehead, muttered something about getting back to work, and left the house without even asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling better, if she wanted him to stay. The door closed behind him, and Sarah was alone again with the strange feeling that something very important had just happened, something she didn't fully understand, but that left her deeply unsettled. Since then, that moment had haunted her. She tried to ask about the documents a few days later, but Ethan said he had already filed everything, and there was nothing more to worry about. She thought about contacting her own lawyer, but was ashamed to admit she had signed something without reading it, afraid of looking incompetent, worried that Ethan would be angry with her for questioning him. So she let it go, tried to convince herself she was just being paranoid, that the stress of the pregnancy was making her mind create non-existent problems. But the bad feeling persisted, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear, even in the brightest light. The phone rang, interrupting her anguished thoughts. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. She answered with a sigh. "Are you ready?" he asked, without any greeting, without a single word of affection, without even asking how her day had been. His tone was impatient, almost annoyed, as if she were a subordinate delaying one of his important appointments. "I'm still getting ready," Sarah replied, making a conscious effort to keep her voice calm, not to show how much his coldness hurt her. "Ethan, I'm really not feeling well. My legs are so swollen, my head is aching, I'm so tired. Can't we reconsider? You could go alone, I'm sure you don't need me there. I could stay home, rest, and you could focus on your meetings without worrying about me." There was a pause on the line, and she could almost feel his irritation coming through the phone. When he spoke, his voice was hard, with no room for negotiation. "Sarah, we've already been over this. Several times, in fact. This event is crucial for me. Absolutely crucial. You know how hard I've worked to get where I am, how much I've busted my ass to build this career, to network with the right people, to create a solid image in the market. I need you by my side tonight. I'm not asking you to do anything but show up, stand there, and smile at the right people. It's just one night, a few hours. You can rest all you want tomorrow, on Sunday, the whole week if you want. But tonight I need you there, got it?" Every word was a blow. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill over again. She wanted to scream that it wasn't just about being tired, that it was about feeling invisible, disposable, reduced to an accessory in his life. She wanted to say that she needed a husband who genuinely cared about her, not someone who saw her only as part of the perfect decor he presented to the world. But she said none of that, because she knew it would be useless, that he wouldn't listen, that he would turn it all into her being dramatic, her pregnancy hormones acting up, her lack of understanding of the demands of the modern corporate world. "Okay," she said softly, her voice defeated. "I'll be ready when you get here." "Great," he replied immediately, sounding pleased to have gotten her compliance without having to prolong the conversation. "I'll be there in half an hour, on the dot." The call ended abruptly, without a goodbye, without a "see you later," without an "I love you" that hadn't been said in so long that Sarah couldn't even remember the last time. Sarah stared at the phone for a few seconds, feeling a tightness in her chest. Slowly she rose from the armchair, held her belly with her hands, and walked to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but there was still beauty there, a beauty that no longer seemed to matter to the man she had married. She took a quick shower, applied a gentle moisturizer to her skin, and combed her long brown hair, letting it fall loose over her shoulders. Her makeup was light, just enough to hide the fatigue. The ivory dress fell perfectly over her body, contouring her belly without constricting, elegant without being ostentatious. Sarah put on a pair of flat shoes, grabbed a small clutch, and slowly descended the stairs, holding onto the railing. Ethan arrived right on time. He was impeccable as always, a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a silk tie, his hair combed back, expensive cologne. He barely glanced at her when he walked in. "Let's go," he said simply, checking his watch. In the car, the silence was heavy. Sarah looked out the window, watching the city pass by as they headed towards the Upper East Side, the affluent neighborhood where the Grand Plaza Hotel was located. Ethan was typing on his phone non-stop, occasionally letting out soft chuckles at messages he received. She didn't ask who he was talking to. She didn't want to know, or maybe she was afraid to know. The Grand Plaza was imposing. Golden lights illuminated the classic facade, beds of fragrant flowers decorated the entrance, and a red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main lobby. Luxury cars lined up, dropping off elegantly dressed couples for the event. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. This world of appearances and superficiality had always made her uncomfortable. She preferred her work in the communities, the genuine conversations with the women she helped, the simplicity of those who fight to survive. Ethan handed the car keys to the valet and offered Sarah his arm. She took it, more out of a need for physical support than affection. Climbing the marble staircase was difficult. Her legs felt heavy, her belly pulled her down, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. Ethan didn't ask if she was okay, he just quickened his pace. The main ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling. Tables decorated with white and gold flower arrangements were scattered throughout the space, and an orchestra played soft classical music in the background. Hundreds of people circulated, talking, laughing, showing off expensive jewelry and designer clothes. Sarah recognized a few familiar faces, businessmen who had once donated to her foundation, celebrities who publicly supported social causes, politicians who spoke eloquently but did little. They had barely entered the ballroom when Ethan let go of her arm. "I need to greet some people," he said quickly. "You'll be fine here." Before Sarah could respond, he had already walked away, heading towards a group of men in suits chatting near the bar. She stood there alone, clutching her purse with both hands, feeling completely out of place. A few people walked past her, casting quick glances, but no one stopped to talk. It was as if she were invisible. Sarah decided to look for a chair. Her feet were already aching, despite the flat shoes. She walked slowly through the ballroom, looking for a place where she could sit discreetly, but all the tables were occupied or reserved. She sighed. Maybe it was better to stand near the wall, leaning for support, waiting for time to pass. That's when she saw it. Across the ballroom, Ethan was laughing loudly. He was the center of a lively group, a glass of champagne in his hand, making grand gestures, a wide smile on his face, and next to him, very close, was her. The woman in red. Sarah felt her heart race. Tall, slender, in a daring red dress, with perfectly straight black hair falling like a silk curtain over her bare shoulders, wearing stilettos that made her even more imposing. She was laughing at the same joke Ethan was telling, lightly touching his arm, tilting her head in a studiedly charming way. And Ethan was reciprocating. He smiled at her in a way he no longer smiled at Sarah. He looked at her with interest, with desire, with complicity. Sarah knew that woman, Jessica Vance, head of public relations at the company where Ethan worked. Young, ambitious, known for her ability to climb the corporate ladder quickly. Sarah had seen her a few times at corporate events, always impeccable, always surrounded by powerful men. There was something about her that bothered Sarah, a calculated coldness behind her friendly smile. For a moment, Sarah thought about approaching them, about walking over to Ethan and claiming her place by her husband's side. But her feet wouldn't obey. She stood there, frozen, watching from a distance as the scene unfolded. Jessica whispered something in Ethan's ear. He let out a loud laugh, shaking his head as if to say she was terrible. The other men in the group laughed too. It was such a natural, intimate dynamic that Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest. Then Jessica looked in her direction. Her dark eyes met Sarah's, and for a brief second, something flickered across her face. Recognition, and something else. Defiance, perhaps, or triumph. Sarah quickly looked away, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. Shame for being there, pregnant, alone, watching her own husband with another woman. Shame for not having the courage to confront him. Shame for still loving him after everything. She decided to find the restroom. She needed a moment alone, away from that oppressive ballroom, away from the eyes that seemed to be judging her. She walked through the side corridors, found the sign, and entered the women's restroom. It was luxurious. All marble with huge mirrors and a soft lavender scent. Sarah leaned her hands on the sink, bowed her head, and took several deep breaths, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow. "Don't cry," she told herself. "Not here. Not now." She lightly wet her hands, splashed cold water on her face, careful not to smudge her makeup, and dried herself with a soft towel. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired, sad, lost. When had she become so fragile? Where was the determined Sarah who had founded a non-profit at 23? The Sarah who had faced down bureaucrats and businessmen to secure funding? The Sarah who never backed down from injustice? She straightened her back, lifted her chin. That Sarah was still in there. She just needed to remember it. When she returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. The lights had been partially dimmed, and a huge screen was set up on the main stage. A middle-aged host, in an impeccable suit and a professional smile, was walking onto the stage, holding a microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said with an enthusiastic voice. "Welcome to the Social Impact Business Gala. Tonight, we celebrate the people and organizations that make a difference in our society, who turn profit into purpose, who understand that true success is measured by the good we do for others." Polite applause echoed through the ballroom. Sarah scanned the room for Ethan but couldn't find him. He was probably still with that group, with that woman. She sighed and leaned against the nearest wall, crossing her arms over her belly. The host continued talking about the event's goals, the sponsors, the award categories. Sarah listened with half an ear. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from her marriage, trying to pinpoint exactly when it all started to fall apart. It was during one of these mental wanderings that she felt a presence beside her. She turned her head and saw a young man, no older than 25, holding a professional camera. He smiled shyly at her. "Excuse me for bothering you," he said softly. "You're Sarah Miller, right? From the Haven Project?" Sarah blinked, surprised. "Yes, I am." The young man's face lit up. "I thought so. My name is Leo. I'm a freelance photographer hired to cover the event tonight. I just wanted to thank you. My mum was helped by your foundation 3 years ago. She was pregnant, with no support, no resources, completely lost. You guys gave her shelter, helped with her prenatal care, and found her a job after my little brother was born. You really changed her life. You changed our family's life." Sarah felt her eyes well up. This was exactly what she needed to hear at that moment. A reminder of why she did what she did. A reminder that her work had value, even when everything around her seemed to be crumbling. "I'm so happy to hear that," she said with a genuine smile. "How is your mom now?" "She's great, working, taking care of my brother, rebuilding her life. She always talks about you with so much affection, says you're an angel. I wanted to do something to give back, you know. That's why I started photographing charity events, donating part of what I earn to social causes." "That's beautiful, Leo. I'm sure your mom is very proud of you." He gave a wide smile, shaking his head as if he didn't know what else to say. "Well, I just really wanted to thank you and to say that if you need anything tonight, you can count on me." "Thank you," Sarah said, touched by the young man's kindness. Leo nodded and moved away, getting back to his job of photographing the guests. Sarah watched him for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. It was for people like his mother, like this generous young man, that she kept fighting every day. But the feeling of comfort was short-lived. Across the ballroom, she saw Ethan approaching. And he wasn't alone. Jessica was walking beside him, the two of them talking animatedly, she laughing at something he said. Sarah felt her stomach churn. They were coming toward her. When they got close, Ethan finally seemed to remember he had a wife. "Oh, Sarah," he said with an overly casual tone, "this is Jessica Vance from the company's PR team. Jessica, my wife, Sarah." Jessica extended her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Ethan talks so much about you." "The pleasure is mine," Sarah replied, shaking her hand briefly. Jessica's hand was cold, her grip a little too firm. "What a beautiful dress," Jessica commented, her eyes scanning Sarah, from head to toe in a way that didn't feel like a compliment. "Ivory is such a delicate color, but appropriate considering your condition. How many months are you?" 7 months, Sarah answered, her voice controlled. "Oh, how wonderful. It must be such a special time," Jessica said with a practiced smile. "Ethan told me you're expecting a girl. Congratulations." "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence settled. Ethan was fiddling with his phone, clearly uninterested in the interaction. Jessica kept smiling, but there was something predatory in that smile. Sarah felt a chill. "Well, "I'm going to get a drink," Ethan said suddenly. "Do you two want anything?" "Champagne for me," Jessica requested quickly. "Water, please," Sarah said. Ethan nodded and walked off toward the bar. Sarah was left alone with Jessica. The woman in red took a step closer, invading Sarah's personal space. "You know, Sarah," she began in a low, almost confidential voice, "it's brave of you to have come tonight. Pregnant, tired, in this world that's clearly not yours. Most women would have stayed home, resting." "My husband thought it was important for me to be here," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Jessica's smile widened. "Oh yes, Ethan is very dedicated to his image, isn't he? Always worried about what others will think, about how things look. He works so hard to maintain that perfect facade. It must be exhausting." Sarah felt the provocation but didn't respond. Jessica continued, "I admire your foundation, really. It's beautiful work helping the less fortunate. But it must be hard to balance that with being the wife of such a successful executive. They're such different worlds, don't you think?" Before Sarah could reply, Ethan returned with the drinks. He handed the glass of champagne to Jessica and a cup of water to Sarah. He seemed impatient, looking around as if searching for someone. "Let's mingle a bit," he said to Jessica. "There are some people I want you to meet." "Of course," she replied promptly. And just like that, without a single glance at Sarah, the two of them walked away together, leaving her alone once again. She stood there, holding the cup of water with both hands, feeling a deep and painful loneliness. This wasn't her place. These weren't her people. And the man who was supposed to be by her side clearly preferred the company of another. Sarah drank the water slowly, trying to soothe the lump growing in her throat. Her daughter moved inside her, a gentle kick as if to say she was there, that she wasn't alone. Sarah placed a hand on her belly and took a deep breath. "Just a few more hours," she thought. "Just hold on for a few more hours and then you can go home." But she had no idea that the night was just beginning, and that in a few minutes her life would change in a way she could never have imagined. Sarah stared at the phone for a few seconds after the call ended. Slowly she rose from the armchair. Her daughter moved inside her, a strong kick. Sarah placed a hand on her belly. "It's going to be okay, little one. We'll survive this night." But she didn't believe her own words. She walked to the bathroom, holding onto the wall. The mirror awaited her with its cruel truth. She looked at her reflection and saw a woman she barely recognized. The hot water from the shower helped a little. She stood there for long minutes, letting the water massage her aching back. She washed. Her hair carefully lathered her body, trying to find a moment of peace in the simple ritual. The steam created a temporary bubble where she could pretend the world outside didn't exist. When she got out of the shower, she dried herself slowly, applied a soft, fragrant moisturizer to her skin, and patiently combed her long brown hair, letting it fall loose over her shoulders because she knew any more elaborate hairstyle would be uncomfortable with the weight of her belly pulling at her center of gravity. Her makeup was light, subtle, foundation to even out her skin tone, concealer to hide the deep dark circles from weeks of poor sleep, a touch of blush to bring some color to her pale face, mascara to open up her tired eyes, and a nude lipstick that wouldn't draw attention. Nothing exaggerated, nothing that could be criticized. The woman staring back from the mirror now looked more presentable, more in line with what was expected of her that night. But inside, she was still that broken woman who cried alone on the sofa, who signed documents without reading them, because she blindly trusted a man who no longer deserved her trust. The ivory dress slid over her body like a soft promise. It fell perfectly, contouring her belly without being tight, the ankle length elegant and sober, the discreet cut appropriate for someone who didn't want to be the center of attention, but also couldn't look sloppy. Sarah put on a pair of nude-colored flat shoes, grabbed a small clutch where she kept only the essentials, lipstick, tissues, her phone, the prenatal care card she always carried with her. She gave one last look in the mirror. She was adequate. That was all she could do. She descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other on the wall, each step a small victory. The house was too quiet, too big for the emptiness that filled its rooms. A beautiful house, no doubt, decorated with good taste, full of expensive furniture and carefully selected art pieces. But none of it mattered. A house only becomes a home when there's love inside it. And love, Sarah was beginning to realize, had left that house a long time ago, leaving only the empty shells of two people who shared the same roof but lived in completely separate universes. Ethan arrived right on time, as promised. She heard the roar of the imported car's engine, his footsteps as he came through the front door, the clinking of keys being tossed onto the silver tray on the console table. He entered the living room where she was sitting, waiting. Impeccable as always, a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that highlighted his broad shoulders and athletic build, an Italian silk tie in a wine-red shade, dark hair combed back with gel, clean-shaven, expensive cologne she recognized immediately. That woody fragrance that once made her melt and now just made her nauseous. He barely looked at her. He checked, the expensive watch on his wrist, then his phone, typed something quickly, and then finally directed his eyes to her. But it was an evaluative, critical gaze, like an art director inspecting an actress to see if she was right for the part. "Let's go," he said simply, his voice impatient. "We can't be late." In the car, the silence was deafening. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, struggling to fasten the seatbelt over her belly, adjusting the dress around her legs. Ethan turned on the stereo, soft classical music, and started driving. She looked out the window, watching the city pass by. New York at dusk on a Friday was a spectacle of lights, illuminated skyscrapers, streets congested even at that hour, people heading home from work or out for the night, life pulsing on every corner. And inside that luxury car, she felt completely dead. Ethan texted on his phone whenever they stopped at a red light. She saw it out of the corner of her eye. Messages were constantly coming in. He replied quickly, sometimes letting out soft chuckles at something he read, sometimes frowning as if solving a problem. She didn't ask who he was talking to. She already knew. Or rather, she strongly suspected. And she didn't want confirmation. Because as long as it was just a suspicion, she could still pretend to herself that she was wrong, that it was just paranoia, that their marriage could still be fixed. They headed towards the Upper East Side, the city's affluent neighborhood where the Grand Plaza Hotel was located. The streets grew wider, the townhouses larger, the cars more expensive. It was a world apart, a bubble of privilege where people lived oblivious to the problems of the city outside. Sarah knew this world well. She had grown up in it, the daughter of a traditional New York family, had attended the best private schools, belonged to the most exclusive clubs. But she had always felt out of place. She had always preferred simple people, real stories, genuine struggles. That's why she created the foundation. To do something that truly mattered, not to be just another socialite spending money on frivolous things. The Grand Plaza was imposing even by Upper East Side standards, a historic building that had been carefully renovated to maintain its classic architecture, while incorporating all the modern amenities the New York elite expected. Golden lights illuminated the limestone facade, Greek columns decorated the main entrance, and beds of fragrant flowers, white roses and lilies, exuded a sweet fragrance into the night air. A red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main lobby, flanked by gold velvet ropes. Luxury cars, Porsches, Mercedes, BMWs, Audis, lined up, dropping off elegantly dressed couples for the event. Ethan handed the car keys to the valet with the air of someone used to being served, gave a generous tip to ensure the car was parked in a prime spot, and then turned to Sarah. For the first time that night, he offered her his arm. It wasn't an affectionate gesture. It was a calculated one, part of the performance that was beginning. The successful executive with his pregnant wife, the perfect family image he wanted to project. She took his arm more out of a need for physical support than for any other reason. The marble staircase leading to the main entrance seemed dauntingly high. Her feet were already aching, her legs felt heavy, and her belly pulled her down in a way that destabilized every step. But she forced herself to maintain her composure, to climb each step, with dignity, not to show weakness. Ethan didn't ask if she was okay. He just quickened his pace, almost dragging her, eager to get inside. The lobby was stunning. Polished marble floors reflected the immense crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, walls paneled with rich wood, oil paintings by American masters decorating the spaces, majestic floral arrangements on strategically placed side tables. Everything screamed luxury, power, exclusivity. Discreet but attentive security guards were positioned at strategic points. Impeccable receptionists checked the guest list, smiling professionally at everyone. They presented their invitations. A young woman in a black suit and Pearls checked their names, ticked them off the list, and directed them to the main ballroom on the second floor. They went up another staircase, this one with a red carpet that muffled their steps. Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable, as if she were entering enemy territory, as if she didn't belong there. And maybe she really didn't belong anymore. Maybe she never had. The main ballroom was even more impressive than she remembered from previous events. Huge, with a soaring ceiling supported by columns decorated with gold leaf. Baccarat crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each decorated with arrangements of white and gold flowers, scented candles, porcelain dinnerware, crystal glasses, and silver cutlery. A chamber orchestra played soft classical music in the background, creating an atmosphere of discreet sophistication. And people, hundreds of them, circulated through the ballroom. Men in tuxedos or tailored suits, women in evening gowns, expensive jewelry sparkling on necks, wrists, and ears, lively conversations, rehearsed laughter, the characteristic buzz of the elite networking. Sarah recognized a few faces. Businessmen who had once donated to the foundation and then never answered her emails again. Celebrities who supported social causes on social media, but did very little in practice. Politicians who gave beautiful speeches about inequality, but voted against bills that would actually help the poor. It was the same circle as always, the same masks, the same well-dressed hypocrisy. They had barely entered the ballroom when Ethan dropped her arm as if it were burning. The gesture was so abrupt, she almost lost her balance. "I need to greet some important people," he said quickly, his eyes already scanning the room for familiar faces, for opportunities, for connections that could be useful. "You'll be fine here, right? If you need anything, send me a text." Before Sarah could respond, before she could say she didn't feel well on her own, that she wished he would stay for at least a few minutes, he had already walked away. He strode purposefully toward a group of men in suits chatting near the bar, leaving her there, planted in the middle of the ballroom like a lone tree in an open field. She stood still for a few seconds, unsure of what to do. She clutched her purse with both hands, trying to look natural but feeling completely out of place and exposed. A few people walked past her, casting quick glances, assessing her simple dress, her large belly, the absence of flashy jewelry, and kept walking. No one stopped to talk. It was as if she were invisible, or worse, visible but irrelevant. Sarah decided to look for a chair. Her feet were already complaining, despite the flat shoes. The pain in her back was getting worse. She needed to sit, to rest at least a little before facing the hours ahead. She walked slowly through the ballroom, dodging groups of people in animated conversation, looking for a place where she could settle discreetly. But all the tables seemed to be occupied or reserved, small placards indicating the names of companies or important people. She sighed in frustration. Maybe it was better to stand near the wall, leaning for support, waiting for time to pass like sand in an hourglass. That's when she looked in the opposite direction, and her heart almost stopped. Across the ballroom, near the large bar serving French champagne and elaborate cocktails, Ethan was the center of a lively group, a glass of golden champagne in his hand, making grand gestures as he told some story. A wide smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. And next to him, very close, dangerously close, was her. The woman in red. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. The entire ballroom seemed to disappear for a second, her vision narrowing until all she could see was that scene. Those two together, that intimacy that screamed familiarity, complicity, something far beyond work colleagues. Jessica Vance, tall as a runway model, slender with curves that the daring red dress displayed without any shyness. The deep V neckline plunged dangerously, revealing perfect tanned skin. A side slit ran up to her thigh, showing off long toned legs every time she moved. Perfectly straight black hair fell like a silk curtain over her bare, tanned shoulders, shining under the light of the chandeliers. Stilettos, at least 5 inches high, made her even more imposing, making her stand out in the crowd. Flawless makeup, red lipstick that perfectly matched her dress, dramatically lined eyes, false eyelashes that accentuated her feline gaze. She was laughing at the same joke Ethan was telling, tilting her head back in a studiedly charming way, her delicate hand lightly touching his arm, her fingers lingering there longer than would be appropriate between colleagues. And Ethan was responding with an intimacy that cut Sarah like a knife. He smiled at her, in a way he no longer smiled at his wife. He looked at her with interest, with barely disguised desire. With that complete attention every human being craves, but that Sarah hadn't received from him in so long, she could barely remember what it felt like. The other men in the group were also clearly captivated by Jessica. They laughed at her jokes, competed for her attention, nervously adjusted themselves when she looked at them. But it was clear, painfully clear, that her main focus was Ethan, and his focus was her. Sarah knew Jessica, not well, but enough to feel that visceral discomfort whenever she saw her. Head of public relations at the same company where Ethan worked, in the marketing and corporate communications department. Young, probably no older than 28, but already known in the industry for her impressive ability to climb the corporate ladder quickly. She had started as an intern and in less than 4 years was already a manager leading a team, participating in board meetings, closing million-dollar deals. Some said she was simply competent, even brilliant. Others whispered that she knew how to use her physical attributes strategically, that she cultivated close relationships with powerful men who could open doors for her. Sarah had never known which version to believe, until now. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought about approaching them, about walking over to that group with all the dignity she could muster, standing by her husband's side, claiming her place as his wife, as the woman carrying his child. But her feet wouldn't obey. She stood there, paralyzed, watching from a distance, like a spectator of her own life crumbling, unable to intervene, unable to act. Jessica whispered something in Ethan's ear, so close that her red lips almost touched his earlobe. He let out a loud, genuine laugh, the kind that comes from deep in the chest, and shook his head as if to say she was terrible, impossible, irresistible. The other men laughed too, sharing in the joke Sarah couldn't hear. It was such a natural, fluid, intimate dynamic that there was no denying it. Those two people had a connection, and Sarah, the legitimate wife, the mother of the child he never really wanted, was standing there watching it all happen and doing absolutely nothing to stop it. It was then that Jessica looked in her direction, as if she felt the weight of that fixed gaze from across the ballroom. Her dark, dramatically lined eyes met Sarah's. For a brief second, maybe 2, 3, that felt like an eternity, the two women stared at each other through the crowd, and something flickered across Jessica's face. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't embarrassment. It was recognition, yes, but also triumph. A small, almost imperceptible smile curved her red lips. A smile that said she knew exactly who Sarah was, and that she didn't care one bit. On the contrary, she seemed pleased to have been seen, to make it clear that Ethan was there with her, not with his pregnant, abandoned wife on the other side of the room. Sarah quickly looked away, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. Shame for being there, 7 months pregnant, alone, watching her own husband shamelessly flirt with another woman in public. Shame for not having the courage to confront him, to make a scene, to demand respect. Shame for still loving him despite everything, for still hoping that some version of him she had known at the beginning would return. Shame for being so weak when she had always prided herself on being strong. She needed to get out of there, at least temporarily. She needed a moment alone, away from that oppressive ballroom, away from the eyes that seemed to be judging her, away from the painful sight of her husband with another woman. She walked through the side corridors, following the signs until she found the women's restroom. She entered almost at a run, or as close as she could get, to running with that enormous belly. The restroom was as luxurious as everything else in that hotel. All Italian marble, huge mirrors with gold frames, spacious stalls, porcelain sinks with gold faucets, French brand liquid soap, soft towels stacked in wicker baskets, a soft lavender fragrance floating in the air-conditioned air. It was empty, thank God. Sarah leaned her hands on the sink, bowed her head, and took several deep breaths, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow into uncontrollable tears. "Don't cry," she ordered herself firmly. "Not here, not now. You'll smudge your makeup, your face will. Get puffy, and when you go back to that ballroom, everyone will know you've been crying. Everyone will know you're weak, pathetic, unable to keep your composure." But the tears came anyway. Silent, hot, streaming down the face she tried to keep held high. She lightly wet her hands in the cold water, splashed it on her face with extreme care not to completely ruin her makeup, just enough to soothe her burning skin. She dried herself with one of the soft towels, looked in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but not terribly so. She touched up the mascara. That had smudged a little, applied another touch of concealer to her dark circles, and reapplied the lipstick that had disappeared from her nervously bitten lips. The woman staring back from the mirror looked tired, sad, lost. But at least she didn't look completely destroyed. There was still something there, a spark of strength hidden deep inside. When had she become so fragile? Where was the determined Sarah who had founded a non-profit at 23, fresh out of college, full of ideals and courage? The Sarah who had faced down corrupt bureaucrats to get permits, who had knocked on the doors of rich, arrogant businessmen to ask for donations, who never backed down from injustice or accepted no for an answer. That Sarah wouldn't let anyone humiliate her like this. That Sarah would confront her husband right there, in the middle of the ballroom, and demand respect. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, took a deep breath. That Sarah was still in there. She was just dormant, under layers of disappointment and exhaustion. But she still existed. When she returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. The lights had been partially dimmed and a huge screen was being set up on the stage. A middle-aged host in an impeccable suit, with graying hair and a professional smile, was walking onto the stage with a microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said with an enthusiastic voice. "Welcome to the 10th Annual Social Impact Business Gala. Tonight, we celebrate the people and organizations that make a real difference in our society, who turn profit into purpose, who understand that true success is measured by the good we do for others." Polite applause echoed through the ballroom. Sarah scanned the room for Ethan but couldn't find him. He was probably still with that group, with that woman. She sighed and leaned against the wall, crossing her arms over her belly. The host continued talking about the event's goals, the sponsors who made the night possible, and the award categories that would be announced. Sarah listened with half an ear. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from her marriage, trying to identify the signs she had ignored. It was during one of these wanderings that she felt a presence beside her. She turned her head and saw a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. Slim, tall, with tan skin, curly, hair, black-rimmed glasses, and a shy but genuine smile. He was holding a professional camera and had a press pass hanging around his neck. "Excuse me for bothering you," he said softly, respectfully, as if afraid of intruding. "You're Sarah Miller, right? From the Haven Project?" Sarah blinked, surprised. It was rare for anyone to recognize her at these corporate events where she was always just Ethan Hayes' wife, never Sarah Miller on her own merit. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice tinged with curiosity. The young man's face lit up with a joy so genuine it was impossible not to be moved. "I thought so. I saw your picture in some articles about the foundation. My name is Leo Martinez. I'm a freelance photographer, hired to cover the event tonight. I just wanted, if you'll allow me, to thank you personally. From the bottom of my heart." Sarah felt a pang of emotion. "Thank me for what?" Leo nervously adjusted his glasses. "My mom was helped by your foundation 3 years ago. She was pregnant with my little brother, and my stepdad had abandoned her. She had nowhere to go, she was lost. A neighbor told her, About the foundation. You guys took her in, helped with all her prenatal care, and found her a better job after my brother was born. You really changed her life. You changed our whole family. Sarah felt her eyes well up again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude for hearing exactly what she needed to hear at that specific moment. A painful but necessary reminder of why she did what she did. A reminder that her work had immense value, even when everything around her seemed to be crumbling, even when her marriage was in pieces, even when she felt invisible and disposable. There were people out there whose lives she had touched in a real and permanent way. "I'm so happy to hear that, Leo," she said with a genuine smile that hadn't graced her face in hours. "How is your mom now?" "She's great. She got the job you helped her find. She's working at a clinic. My little brother is 3 now, healthy, smart. She always talks about you with so much affection. Says you're an angel. I wanted to give back too, that's why I photograph charity events. I donate part of what I earn to social causes." Sarah felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest. "That's beautiful, Leo. Your mom must be very proud of you. And I'm so glad we were able to help. It's for stories like your family's that I do what I do every day." The young man gave a wide smile, shaking his head several times as if still processing the emotion of finally meeting the person who had saved his family. "Well, I just really wanted to thank you, for real, and to say that if you need anything tonight, anything at all, you can count on me. I'm here working, but I'm also here as someone who owes you a debt of eternal gratitude." "Thank you, Leo. That means a lot to me, more than you can imagine." He nodded shyly and moved away, getting back to his job of photographing the guests, capturing moments that would become memories preserved in pixels. Sarah watched him for a long moment, feeling a deep gratitude that warmed her wounded heart. It was for people like his mother, like this generous young man who turned pain into purpose, that she kept fighting every day. It was for them that she couldn't give up, couldn't surrender to the sadness that threatened to swallow her. But the feeling of comfort, like all good things on that cursed night, was very short-lived. Across the ballroom, she saw movement. Ethan was approaching, and he wasn't alone. Jessica was walking beside him, the two of them talking animatedly, she gesturing gracefully, he nodding in agreement with whatever she was saying. The champagne glasses sparkled in their hands. They were coming directly towards Sarah. She felt her stomach churn. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but her feet were glued to the floor. When they got close, Ethan finally seemed to remember, with the air of someone fulfilling an unpleasant social obligation, that he had a wife. "Oh, Sarah," he said with an overly casual, overly indifferent tone, as if she were a distant acquaintance he had run into by chance. "This is Jessica Vance, from the company's PR team. Jessica, my wife, Sarah." Jessica extended her hand with a smile that definitely didn't reach her eyes. "A pleasure to meet you in person, Sarah. Ethan talks so much about you, so much." "The pleasure is mine," Sarah replied mechanically, shaking her hand briefly. Jessica's hand was cold, her grip a little too firm, lasting a few seconds longer than necessary, as if marking her territory. "What a beautiful dress," Jessica commented, her eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe in a way that was definitely not a sincere compliment. It was an evaluation, a comparison. "Ivory is such a delicate, pure color. Very appropriate, considering your condition. How many months are you?" 7 months, Sarah answered, making a conscious effort to keep her voice controlled, neutral. "Oh, how wonderful," Jessica said with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror until it reached false perfection. "It must be such a special, magical time. Ethan told me you're expecting a girl. My congratulations to you both." "Thank you," Sarah said, each word feeling like a splinter. A tense silence settled between them. Ethan was on his phone again, texting, clearly uninterested in the interaction he himself had initiated. Jessica kept smiling, but there was something predatory in that smile, something that made Sarah feel like prey being sized up by a predator before the attack. The tension in the air was palpable, thick, suffocating. "Well, I'm going to get a drink," Ethan said suddenly, putting his phone in his pocket. Do you two want anything?" "Champagne for me," Jessica requested quickly, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Water, please," Sarah said, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan nodded vaguely and walked off toward the bar, leaving the two women alone. The air grew even heavier. Jessica took a step closer, deliberately invading Sarah's personal space, forcing her to look up due to the height difference accentuated by the stilettos. "You know, Sarah," she began in a low, almost confidential voice, as if sharing a secret between friends, "it's very brave of you to have come tonight. 7 months pregnant, clearly tired, in this corporate world that's obviously not yours. Most women in your situation would have stayed home, resting, taking care of themselves and the baby." Sarah felt the provocation but tried to maintain her composure. "My husband thought it was important for me to be here, and I like to support him." Jessica's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfectly white to be natural. "Oh yes, Ethan is very dedicated to his public image, isn't he? Always so. Worried about what others will think, about how things look to the outside world. He works tirelessly to maintain that perfect facade of a successful executive, a family man, a future model father. It must be absolutely exhausting for him." Sarah didn't respond. She knew anything she said would be used against her. Jessica continued, her voice low but clear. "I really admire your foundation. It's beautiful, noble work, helping the less fortunate, people in vulnerable situations. But it must be incredibly difficult to balance that with being the wife of an executive as successful and ambitious as Ethan. Such different worlds, almost incompatible. You with your poor pregnant women and your sad stories, he with his million-dollar contracts and his business dinners. Don't you think?" Before Sarah could formulate a response that didn't sound desperate or defensive, Ethan returned with the drinks. He handed the glass of champagne to Jessica with a smile and a plain cup of water to Sarah without even looking at her. He seemed impatient, restless, constantly looking around as if searching for someone more interesting. "Let's mingle a bit more," he said to Jessica, completely ignoring the wife who was standing there like a pillar of salt. "There are some important people I want you to meet. International investors who could be useful for our upcoming projects." "Of course," she replied promptly, her voice full of professional enthusiasm. And just like that, without a single glance at Sarah, without a word of apology, without any acknowledgement that he was leaving his pregnant wife alone once again, the two of them walked away together. Sarah stood there, holding the cup of mineral water with two trembling hands, feeling a loneliness so profound it physically ached in her chest. This wasn't her place. These weren't her people. And the man who was supposed to be by her side, protecting her, valuing her, loving her, clearly preferred the company of another woman. She drank the water slowly, trying to soothe the giant lump growing in her throat, threatening to choke any attempt to maintain her dignity. Her daughter moved inside her, a stronger kick, as if sensing her mother's anguish, as if trying to say she was there, that Sarah wasn't completely alone. She placed her free hand on her enormous belly and took a deep breath, trying to anchor herself in the unconditional love she already felt for the daughter she hadn't even met yet. Just a few more hours, she thought, repeating the mantra she had been using all night. Just hold on for a few more hours, and then you can go home, lie in bed, cry as much as you want, and tomorrow you'll decide what to do with this life that's falling to pieces. But she had no idea that the night was just beginning to reveal its horrors, that in a few minutes something would happen that would change her life forever, that the humiliation she thought she had already endured was just a warm-up for what was about to come, and that across the ballroom, with his professional camera and his grateful heart, a young photographer named Leo was about to become the most important witness of the most important night of Sarah Miller's life. The next morning arrived like an avalanche of notifications, headlines, and camera flashes. The video of the humiliation had spread across the internet with terrifying speed, reaching millions of views before the sun had fully risen over New York. Sarah Miller's name was on every news portal, every social media platform, in every coffee, shop conversation and corporate hallway in the country. The major newspapers ran impactful headlines: "Pregnant woman humiliated at gala while receiving award." Corporate heir watches as mistress assaults wife does nothing. Shocking, video exposes. Psychological abuse against expectant mother at luxury hotel. The images played on a relentless loop, always showing the same devastating moments. The wine being poured, Jessica's cruel smile, Ethan's look of contempt, and then the collective shock when Sarah's name was announced as the night's honoree. But Sarah wasn't home. She was still at the hospital, in a private suite, where she had been admitted as a precaution after the light bleeding the night before. The baby was fine, her heartbeat strong and regular, but the doctors insisted she stay for observation for at least 24 hours. The emotional stress could have unpredictable consequences in such an advanced pregnancy, and no one wanted to risk the child's health. The hospital room was quiet and sterile, with white walls and a large window overlooking the bustling city below. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, staring out the window without really seeing anything. Her eyes were swollen from crying all night, and dark circles were beginning to form beneath them, physical marks of a suffering that went far beyond the body. Her hands trembled slightly whenever she recalled the sensation of the wine running down her belly, the sound of Ethan's mistress's laughter, the look of contempt from her own husband. How had she gotten here? How had she allowed her life to turn into this nightmare? Throughout the night, she had replayed every moment of the past few months. The small humiliations Ethan had started inflicting at home. The times he came home late, smelling of another woman's perfume, and she chose to believe his flimsy excuses. About meetings that ran long. The cruel comments about her body changing with the pregnancy. The growing coldness between them. All the signs were there, but she had chosen not to see them, believing everything would get better once the baby was born. How naive she had been. The door opened softly and Michael walked in, carrying a bag with clean clothes and a thermos of chamomile tea, Sarah's favorite since childhood. Her brother had deep, dark circles under his eyes, a sign that he hadn't slept either. But his eyes held the fierce determination that had always characterized him. He was wearing jeans and a light blue dress shirt, not his usual impeccable suit. He had come straight from home, pushing aside important commitments to be there with her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, approaching the bed and gently placing his hand on hers. His voice carried a tenderness few people knew. In the business world, Michael was known for being ruthless, direct, even feared by some. But here, in this hospital room, he was just the older brother worried about the little sister he had protected his whole life. Sarah tried to smile, but her lips trembled, and more tears streamed down her face. "I should have listened to you, Michael. You warned me about Ethan from the beginning. You saw what I refused to see. Remember when you said he was too controlling? That the way he talked about my work at the foundation sounded more like jealousy than support. I thought you were being overprotective, that you were seeing problems where there were none. But you were right. You were always right." "This isn't the time for blame, Sarah," Michael said firmly but gently. He sat in the chair beside the bed, holding his sister's hand tightly. "Don't do this to yourself. Ethan deceived you. He manipulated you. This is not your fault. You loved that man, you believed in him, and he used that love against you. But now is not the time to blame yourself. It's time for justice. And you're not alone in this, you never were." He picked up the tablet he had brought and showed it to her, adjusting the screen's brightness so it wouldn't hurt her sensitive eyes. "Look at this. The video already has over 15 million views in just the first 12 hours. Hashtags supporting you are among the top trending topics in the country. People are organizing protests in front of Ethan's company, other women are sharing similar stories of emotional abuse in relationships, and businesswomen are publicly speaking out against his and Jessica's behavior. You've touched on something much bigger than you realize. You've become a symbol." Sarah looked at the screen, seeing her own vulnerable face in the frozen image of the moment the wine began to run down her ivory dress, staining it red as if it were blood. It was painful to see her humiliation exposed like that, in high resolution, being shared by millions of people she would never meet. But there was something more in the comments Michael was showing her. It wasn't just superficial compassion or fleeting outrage. Thousands of women were sharing devastatingly similar stories. "My ex did the same thing to me at a family dinner, poured beer on my shirt and said I was drunk when I hadn't even had a drink," one wrote. I was humiliated by my husband in front of his co-workers for 7 years until I found the courage to leave, said another. This isn't about wine, it's about power, it's about men who think they can destroy women without consequences, stated a comment with thousands of likes. There were also messages of direct support. Sarah, I was helped by your foundation when I was pregnant and on the street. You saved me. Now it's our turn to support you. This woman dedicated her life to helping other women and was betrayed in the worst possible way. She deserves justice. Don't let this die down. Let's make sure Ethan Hayes pays for what he did. I wasn't brave, Michael, she whispered. I just stood there frozen like an idiot. You survived, Michael corrected her firmly. And now you're going to do more. You're going to turn this pain into real change. But first, you need to recover and take care of my niece. As if on cue, the baby moved inside Sarah's belly, a gentle but noticeable kick. She placed her hand on her womb, feeling that small precious life that depended on her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It never was. It was about creating a world where her daughter wouldn't have to go through what she was going through. Ethan tried to call me about 20 times overnight, Michael commented, his voice laced with disdain. He swiped his thumb across his phone screen, showing the list of missed calls. And he sent messages through his lawyer, offering a very generous financial settlement. He wants you to sign an NDA in exchange for a considerable sum, uncontested joint custody, and a joint public statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. He wants to buy your silence and rewrite the narrative. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling anger rise in her throat, like bile. He thinks he can buy my silence after all this? After publicly humiliating me? After standing by while that woman poured wine on me and our daughter? He's desperate, Sarah, and he should be, Michael replied, putting his phone aside. His company lost 3 major contracts this morning alone. ExxonMobil cancelled a bid worth over $50 million. JP Morgan Chase suspended the merger negotiations he's been trying to close for months. Clients are cancelling orders, investors are pulling out. His public image is completely destroyed. The company's board of directors is considering removing him as CEO. He desperately needs this to stop growing, but it's too late. The wave has already started, and there's no stopping it now. And Jessica? Sarah asked, referring to the woman in red who had poured the wine on her. Just saying her name made her stomach turn. Michael's face hardened. He crossed his arms and leaned forward in his chair. Jessica Vance, a former model who did some minor campaigns a few years ago, an aspiring entrepreneur with no real successful businesses, known in certain circles for strategically getting involved with wealthy, married men. I found out some very interesting things about her overnight. I hired a private investigator who's worked with me on other corporate cases. He's good, discreet, and extremely efficient. Michael paused, looking directly into his sister's eyes. Jessica is in massive debt, Sarah. We're talking millions. She financed a luxury lifestyle with credit cards and loans she could never pay back. She has lawsuits from former employees of a boutique she tried to open that closed in less than 6 months, leaving everyone unpaid. There are allegations of fraud in fashion projects and events she sold to investors that never materialized. The money just vanished. She's a professional con artist, and she was using Ethan to clean up her name, get capital to cover her frauds, and establish herself in a social position that would give her credibility. Sarah absorbed the information slowly, each word feeling like a piece of a sinister puzzle falling into place. It all made sense now. Ethan's urgency to push her away, to publicly acknowledge his relationship with Jessica, to try to get custody of the baby. He was being manipulated, and she had been just an obstacle in the path of a very well-planned scam. But you know what's most interesting about all this, Michael continued, a glint in his eye that Sarah recognized immediately. It was the look he got, when he had discovered something crucial, something that would completely change the game. Jessica has a sister, Catherine Vance, and you've met her before. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Catherine, the woman who had tried to sue Sarah's foundation years ago for alleged defamation, claiming they had improperly exposed her vulnerable situation during a fundraising campaign. The lawsuit had no merit and was quickly dismissed, when it was proven that all the information used had been authorized in writing by Catherine herself. But the intent had been clear from the start. Catherine wanted money, not justice. She wanted $1 million settlement to shut up and disappear. The Vance sisters have a well-documented history of meticulously planned scams, Michael explained, pulling a folder from the laptop bag he had brought and opening it on the hospital bedside table. Inside were printouts of documents, photos, old news clippings. They carefully select their targets, always wealthy and emotionally vulnerable men. They create elaborate situations, manipulate feelings, plant doubts about wives or girlfriends, and then extort money through blackmail, false lawsuits, or arranged marriages. They've done this at least 4 times that we've been able to document. There's a businessman in Miami who paid $3 million to get rid of Catherine after she threatened to expose supposed financial crimes that she had actually fabricated herself. There's another one in D.C. who almost went bankrupt trying to support Jessica's lifestyle before he discovered the truth. Michael showed Sarah some photos. They were images from social events, galas, business dinners. In all of them, Jessica or Catherine appeared next to well-dressed men, always in prominent positions, always showing off expensive jewelry and calculated smiles. They work as a team. One does the dirty work of seduction and emotional manipulation. The other comes in as backup when needed or creates parallel situations that increase the pressure on the victim. In Ethan's case, Jessica targeted him over a year ago. She studied his routine, frequented the same places, befriended people in his social circle. By the time she finally got a formal introduction, she already knew exactly what to say, how to act, which vulnerabilities to exploit. Sarah felt nauseous. She vaguely remembered Ethan mentioning he had met Jessica at a networking event about 6 months ago. He had commented on how interesting she was, how she understood business, how she was different from the other superficial women he knew. At the time, Sarah hadn't thought much of it, assuming it was just a casual observation. What a fool she had been. Sarah felt a mix of anger and sadness. Ethan had been manipulated, yes, but he had chosen to believe the lies. He had chosen to humiliate her publicly. He had chosen to stand by Jessica's side while she poured wine on a 7-month pregnant woman. There was no excuse for that. "I want to sue them both," Sarah said, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Not for the money, for the message. So that other women see that it's possible to fight back, that we don't have to accept this kind of treatment." Michael smiled, proud. "I've already spoken with the legal team. We're filing a lawsuit for emotional distress, psychological abuse, public humiliation, and attempted coercion. And there's more. The separation agreement Ethan presented last night is void. His lawyer forged your signature." Sarah's eyes widened. "He forged my signature?" "Yes. And that's a crime. We have experts who can prove it. He's in much deeper trouble than he imagines." At that moment, the nurse came in to check Sarah's vital signs and bring her breakfast. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She had graying hair tied in a low bun and calloused hands that revealed years of dedicated work. Her name tag identified her as Brenda, head nurse of the obstetrics unit. As she carefully checked Sarah's blood pressure, she whispered in a tone that mixed admiration and solidarity. "I saw the video during my break last night. Probably half the hospital saw it. You are so brave, dear, so very brave." Sarah looked at her, surprised by the frankness. Brenda continued, adjusting the pressure cuff and noting the values on her clipboard. "My daughter went through something very similar with her ex-boyfriend 2 years ago. He would humiliate her in public, make disparaging comments about her body, openly flirt with other women in front of her. When she finally got the courage to break up with him, he spread lies about her on social media, saying she was unstable, that she had mental health issues. He almost managed to make everyone believe him. She didn't have the strength to report it because she thought no one would believe her over him. She ended up falling into a depression, lost her job, isolated herself from everyone." The nurse paused, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "Seeing you stand up like this, even while pregnant, even while vulnerable, exposing what happened instead of taking money to stay quiet. It gives hope to so many people. It gives hope to my daughter, who is still recovering. It gives hope to all the women who are going through similar situations, but think they're alone. You have no idea how important this is." Sarah felt her eyes well up again, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was gratitude. It was responsibility. It was the understanding that her pain had become something bigger than herself. It was about turning trauma into change. She thanked her softly, her voice choked with emotion, and the nurse squeezed her hand affectionately before leaving discreetly, placing the breakfast tray on the table. Michael waited for the silence to return and then asked, "There's a news crew downstairs wanting a statement from you. The hospital is trying to keep everyone away, but the pressure is immense. Do you want to say anything? You don't have to. We can issue an official statement on your behalf." Sarah thought for a long moment. Part of her wanted to hide, to disappear, to never be seen again. But another part, a part that was growing rapidly inside her, knew that silence now would be a betrayal to all the women who were seeing a voice in her. "I want to speak," she said finally, "but not now. I need to get myself together, to get stronger. I want to speak when I'm ready, when I can look people in the eye and say exactly what needs to be said." "Then we'll do it your way," Michael agreed. "On your time." The day passed slowly in the hospital. Sarah received visits from close friends, the team from the foundation, and even some of the women she had helped over the years. Every hug, every word of support strengthened something inside her that had been broken the night before. In the afternoon, a lawyer Michael had hired arrived to explain the next steps. Lauren Foster, Esquernaire, was known for defending cases of domestic violence and emotional abuse. Tall, with elegant glasses and a firm posture, she sat beside Sarah and opened a folder of documents. "Sarah, first, I want you to know that I completely understand if you want to back down at any point," Lauren began. "Lawsuits like this can be draining, but I also want you to know that we have an extremely solid case. We have the video, we have witnesses, we have the messages Ethan sent afterward, we have the forged signature. It's practically impossible for him to walk away from this unscathed." Sarah listened intently as Lauren explained each stage of the process, the deadlines, the hearings, the possible outcomes. It was daunting, but it was also empowering. She was no longer alone in this fight. "And what about Jessica?" Sarah asked. "Jessica Vance will be charged with assault and public humiliation. The video is clear. She deliberately poured wine on you, a pregnant woman, in public with the intent to humiliate. That's a crime. And if we can prove it was premeditated, that it was a calculated act to push you away from Ethan and facilitate her scams, the penalty could be even more severe." Sarah took a deep breath. Part of her felt sorry for Ethan, for the man she had loved and with whom she had planned to build a family. But the rational part, the part that had been betrayed and humiliated, knew he had made conscious choices. He had chosen to believe Jessica. He had chosen to stand by her side during the humiliation. He had chosen to try to forge documents to take her daughter away from her. "I want to see this through to the end," Sarah affirmed, "not for revenge, but because this is bigger than me. It's about all the women who are disbelieved, manipulated, and silenced." Lauren smiled and extended her hand. "Then let's make history together." That night, after everyone had left and the hospital fell silent, Sarah was alone again with her thoughts. The baby moved peacefully inside her, oblivious to all the chaos of the outside world. She placed her hands on her belly and spoke softly to her daughter. "I promise you I will create a better world. A world where you don't have to accept scraps of respect. A world where your voice will be heard. I will fight, my little one. Not just for me, but for you and for all the girls who will come after." The baby responded with a kick, as if she understood. And in that moment, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't felt in months. She had found her purpose again. It was no longer just about surviving a failed marriage. It was about turning pain into change. In his luxury apartment on the other side of the city, Ethan was slumped on the leather sofa, his phone in his hand, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. The calls from furious clients had stopped, but only because no one wanted to talk to him anymore. His inbox was flooded with cancellation emails, termination requests, and messages from investors pulling out. Jessica was sitting in the armchair opposite him, nervously scrolling through her phone. She was also feeling the weight of the consequences. Brands that had promised partnerships were cancelling, followers were unfollowing her en masse, and the comments on her social media were cruel and relentless. "This will blow over, Ethan," she said, trying to sound confident. "Scandals always blow over. In a week, no one will even remember this." But Ethan knew she was wrong. He had completely underestimated the situation. He had underestimated Sarah. He had underestimated the power of a viral video. And most of all, he had underestimated Michael, who was not a man to let injustices go unpunished. "My lawyer said the signature was identified as a forgery," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "They can sue me for document forgery." Jessica turned pale. "You said you were sure it would work." "I thought it would. But their expert is better than ours." A heavy silence fell between them. Reality was starting to hit with full force. It wasn't just their reputations at stake. It was their freedom, their assets, their future. "Maybe we should just accept whatever settlement she offers," Jessica suggested, tentative and calculating. "Pay what she asks and put this behind us." Ethan looked at her with a mixture of anger and despair. "You think this is about money? Didn't you see the video of her talking? She doesn't want money, she wants justice, and she's going to get it." Jessica stood up abruptly. "So you're just giving up? You're going to let her destroy you?" "She's not destroying me, Jessica. I destroyed myself when I chose to believe you." The words cut through the air like a blade. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't. Because deep down she knew he was right. She had miscalculated. She had chosen the wrong target. Sarah wasn't a fragile, submissive woman. She was a strong woman who had been temporarily broken, but who was rising again with even greater strength. "I'm leaving," Jessica said finally, grabbing her purse. "Good luck with your disaster." She slammed the door on her way out, leaving Ethan alone with the crushing weight of his own choices. He picked up his phone and looked at the picture of Sarah that was still his background. It was an old photo from when they had traveled to the Hamptons at the beginning of their relationship. She was smiling, genuinely happy, her eyes shining with love. When had he lost that? When had he let pride and ambition blind him to what really mattered? But it was too late for regrets. The damage was done, and Ethan knew in the depths of his broken heart that there was no going back. Meanwhile, in a conference room in a corporate building in downtown Manhattan, Michael was sitting at a table with his team of lawyers and public relations experts. They were putting together a comprehensive strategy not just for the legal case, but to turn Sarah's case into a larger movement. "We want to launch a national awareness campaign about psychological abuse against pregnant women," Michael explained. "Use Sarah's story as a starting point, but expand it to include data, testimonials from other women, and support resources. We're going to create a real safety net." The team agreed enthusiastically. This was bigger than a simple case of justice. It was an opportunity for social change. "And what about Sarah's foundation?" one of the lawyers asked. "How can we protect it from any attempts at retaliation?" "We're already working on it," Michael assured them. "We're increasing security, expanding legal support, and ensuring that no false lawsuits can harm her work. The foundation will continue to operate and grow." The meeting went late into the night, with every detail being carefully planned. Michael was determined to ensure that his sister not only got justice, but also found peace and could move forward with her life and her mission. When he finally got home, it was past midnight. He was exhausted but satisfied. The fight was just beginning, but they were prepared, and he wouldn't rest until he saw Sarah completely free from this situation. At the hospital, Sarah finally managed to sleep. Her dreams were restless, full of confusing images and intense emotions, but deep down, there was a growing certainty. She was going to survive this. She was going to overcome it. And she was going to come out stronger than ever. The baby inside her moved gently, as if protecting her mother even before she was born. And in that silent embrace between mother and daughter, still separated by skin and womb but already deeply connected, there was a promise of a future, of a new beginning of hope. The third day after the scandal broke with bombshell news, one of the country's biggest talk shows had invited Sarah for an exclusive interview. The invitation came with a special request. They wanted her to tell her full story, unedited, uninterrupted, giving a voice to the thousands of women who saw themselves reflected in her. Michael brought the proposal to Sarah at the hospital, where she had finally been discharged and was preparing to go home. She looked at the paper, at the name of the show, at the magnitude of the opportunity. "That's a lot of exposure," she pondered, biting her lower lip. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You don't have to be ready," Michael said softly. "You just have to be honest. The rest, the story speaks for itself." Sarah looked out the window of her room at the motion of New York below, that enormous city full of untold stories, of silenced women, of injustices hidden behind facades of success. "I'll do it," she decided, "but on my terms. No melodrama, no victimhood, just the truth." Michael hugged his sister with pride. "You're incredible, Sarah. Mom would be so proud of you." The mention of their mother, who had passed away years ago, brought tears to both their eyes. She had been a strong woman who had raised 2 children on her own after their father abandoned them. She had taught Sarah about dignity, about fighting for her rights, about never accepting scraps of respect. "I know," Sarah whispered, "and I'm doing this for her too, for all the women who came before and had no voice, for all those who will come after and deserve a better world." They left the hospital through a back exit, avoiding the reporters, still camped out at the main entrance. Michael's car was waiting, and soon they were on their way to Sarah's apartment, where she could finally rest in her own space. But when they arrived, they found a surprise at her door, a huge bouquet of white flowers with a card attached. Michael picked it up first, read it, and frowned before handing it to Sarah. "From Ethan," he said, his voice laced with contempt. Sarah opened the card and read the handwritten words, in the calligraphy she knew so well. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I ruined everything. Please give me a chance to fix this. For our daughter's sake, E." She crumpled the card in her hand and threw it in the trash without a second glance. "Our daughter is going to grow up watching her mother fight for dignity, not accept empty apologies from the man who destroyed her." Michael smiled and held the door for her to enter. "That's my sister." Inside the apartment, everything felt different. The furniture was the same, the colors were the same, but the energy had changed. It was no longer a space shared with Ethan. It was her space, the beginning of her new life. Sarah sat on the sofa and for the first time in days allowed herself to breathe deeply, without feeling her chest tighten with anxiety. The storm was far from over. The legal process was just beginning. But she was ready. She was stronger. And she was not alone. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah smiled through her tears. "We're going to make it, little one. I promise." 2 weeks had passed since that fateful night at the luxury hotel. 2 weeks that felt like 2 years in Sarah Miller's life. The entire country was still talking about the case, but now in a different way. It was no longer just about the scandal or the public humiliation. It was about the courageous response, the tireless fight for dignity, the extraordinary transformation of a victim into a living symbol of female resistance. The numbers were staggering and continued to grow. The original video had surpassed 40 million views across all digital platforms. Hashtags related to the case had remained among the top trending topics for days on end. Opinion pieces were published daily in newspapers across the country, debating psychological violence, emotional abuse in relationships, and the culture of silencing women. Television shows dedicated special segments to the case. Psychologists were invited to explain the patterns of manipulative behavior. Lawyers discussed the legal aspects of document forgery and public humiliation. Sociologists analyzed how American society still normalized certain types of abuse when they came from powerful men against their wives. But the most impressive thing was the movement that had formed organically. Women from all over the country were sharing their own stories of humiliation, manipulation, and emotional abuse in relationships. Many of them mentioned Sarah as the inspiration they needed to finally break their silence. Support groups were being created in communities. Reports of domestic violence had increased significantly, a sign that women were finding the courage to seek help. Sarah was at home, in the apartment that was now exclusively hers, a space that was slowly being reclaimed and redefined. Ethan had moved out completely a week ago, taking only his clothes and a few personal belongings in hastily packed suitcases. He had left everything else behind, as if desperately trying to escape any memory of that place, that life, that broken marriage. The apartment had 3 large bedrooms, a spacious living room with a view of the city, and a modern kitchen that Sarah had rarely used before but was now rediscovering. It was in an elegant building in the Upper East Side, a prestigious and leafy neighborhood. When they got married, Ethan had insisted on buying that specific property because he said it was important for their image to live at a prestigious address. Sarah had never cared much for it, but she had agreed because she wanted to please him. Now, walking through the silent rooms, she realized how many decisions she had made just to please Ethan. The cold, minimalist decor he preferred, even though she loved warm colors and plants. The expensive but uncomfortable designer furniture. The abstract art he had chosen to impress guests, but that meant nothing to her. Everything there bore his mark, and she had passively accepted it, believing that compromising on small things was part of a healthy marriage. How had she lost herself so completely? But the silence of the apartment was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of avoided conversations, unresolved tensions, of loneliness in company. It was peaceful. It was liberating. It was honest. It was the silence of a possible new beginning, of a life being reclaimed piece by piece. She was sitting on the living room sofa, stroking her belly, which now seemed even bigger. The baby was active, moving constantly, as if sensing her mother's different energy. Sarah smiled every time she felt a kick, imagining what it would be like to finally hold this child in her arms, far from all the turmoil. On the coffee table in front of her was a spread of documents, interview contracts, invitations to speak, book proposals, requests for testimonials. Her story had touched a raw nerve in American society, and everyone wanted to hear more. But Sarah was being selective. She didn't want to turn her pain into entertainment. She wanted to turn it into real change. Her cell phone rang, showing the name of Lauren, the lawyer Michael had hired. Sarah answered quickly. "Sarah, we have news," Lauren said, her voice a mix of satisfaction and gravity. "Ethan wants to negotiate again, but this time it's different. He's willing to give up joint custody, admit to the signature forgery, and pay a significant settlement for emotional distress. His lawyer made it clear that he's desperate to avoid a public trial." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words. Part of her, the part that still held remnants of the love she once felt for Ethan, felt pity. But the rational part, the part that had been betrayed and humiliated, knew there was no going back. "And what about Jessica?" Sarah asked. "Oh, Jessica is in a much worse situation," Lauren replied, with a tone that suggested professional satisfaction. "After the information about her and her sister's frauds came to light, several creditors filed lawsuits. She's being investigated for fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Catherine has also been indicted. They'll likely face criminal charges for several scams they've pulled over the years. The other men who were their victims are coming forward, giving statements. It's a devastating domino effect for them." Sarah closed her eyes, absorbing the information. She felt no pleasure in Jessica's downfall, but she felt relief that justice was being served. How many other women had been harmed by the Vance sisters' scams? How many other relationships had been destroyed? "And what about the interview on the late-night show?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "Is it still confirmed for tomorrow?" "Yes, it's all set. They'll tape in the afternoon and air it live at night. It will be the first time you speak publicly about everything that happened. Are you sure you're ready?" Sarah looked around the apartment, at the walls that had witnessed her failed marriage, her pain, but also her renewal. She looked down at her belly, feeling another kick from her daughter. She thought of the thousands of women who were waiting to hear her voice, who saw in her a hope that it was possible to fight back. "I'm ready," she affirmed firmly, "more than ever." The conversation with Lauren continued for a few more minutes, finalizing logistical details and communication strategies. When she hung up, Sarah felt a mix of nervousness and determination. This would be the first time she would speak openly about the whole situation, without filters, without mincing words. Michael arrived late that afternoon, bringing dinner from a Japanese restaurant Sarah loved. Salmon sushi, tuna hand rolls, hot miso soup. He knew his sister needed comfort and care in the days leading up to the big interview. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the food on the kitchen table. "Nervous, but determined," Sarah answered, honestly. "I know tomorrow will be hard, reliving all of that in front of the cameras, knowing that millions of people will be watching. But I also know it's necessary. If I don't speak up, how many other women will continue to suffer in silence?" Michael smiled with pride. His little sister had transformed completely in the last few weeks. The fragile, broken woman he had found in the hospital had given way to a determined warrior, aware of her own power. "Mom would be so proud of you," he said softly. "She always said you were strong even when you didn't believe it yourself." Tears rolled down Sarah's face. Their mother, Eleanor, had passed away from a heart condition 5 years ago, but her presence was still felt every day. She had been a strong woman who had raised 2 children on her own after their husband abandoned them. She had taught Sarah about dignity, about never accepting less than she deserved. "I miss her every day," Sarah confessed, "especially now that I'm going to be a mother. I wish so much she were here to meet her granddaughter." "She is here," Michael said, placing a hand over his heart. "She's in you, in the strength you're showing, in the way you're turning this pain into something bigger. She's in your fight." They ate dinner together, talking about plans for the foundation, about the future, about the baby who was about to arrive. Michael had already started setting up the nursery in his apartment, a safe and welcoming space in case Sarah needed support in the first few months. "You're not going to be alone in this, Sarah," he assured her. "Me, the team at the foundation, your friends, will all be here for you and for my niece." The next morning, Sarah woke up with a strange premonitory feeling. It was the day of the interview that would change everything, but there was something else she couldn't quite define. She felt a light contraction in her belly, different from the baby's usual familiar movements. She looked at the digital clock on her nightstand. 5 in the morning. The apartment was still shrouded in the pre-dawn gloom of New York City. Could it be a false alarm? The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks, according to her obstetrician's calculations, but babies had their own schedules, as the doctor always reminded her. "They come when they want to, not when we plan for them," she used to say with a smile. Sarah got up slowly, leaning on the bed to avoid any sudden movements. She went to the kitchen, turned on the soft overhead light, and drank a glass of cold water. The contraction gradually passed, leaving only a feeling of pressure in her lower abdomen. It was probably just the accumulated stress of the upcoming interview. Or maybe the baby was just adjusting in there, looking for a more comfortable position. She decided not to call Michael yet. She didn't want to worry him unnecessarily. She took a deep breath and decided to prepare for the most important day since that night at the hotel. She took a long shower, letting the hot water massage her tense shoulders and her back, which ached from the advanced pregnancy. She washed her hair with her favorite lavender shampoo, the one she had stopped using because Ethan said the scent was too strong. Now she could use whatever she wanted. Small freedoms she was rediscovering every day. She chose her outfit carefully. She wanted something that truly represented her, not an edited version to please others' expectations. She opted for a navy blue dress in a light, comfortable fabric that flattered her pregnant belly without trying to hide or exaggerate it. The days of trying to disguise her pregnancy so as not to bother Ethan were over. At 2 in the afternoon, Sarah was at the studios of the country's biggest talk show. The set was impressive, with professional lighting, high-definition cameras, and a live audience of about 300 people. The host, Diane Bishop, a respected journalist with over 30 years of experience, greeted her warmly backstage. "Sarah, it's an honor to have you here," Diane said, holding her hand sincerely. "I know it's not easy to relive all of this, but I want you to know that this is a safe space. You have complete control over what you want to say. If at any point you want to stop, we'll stop." Sarah thanked her, feeling welcomed. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress that flattered her pregnant belly without exaggeration. Her hair was down, in natural waves, and her makeup was light, almost imperceptible. She wanted to look like herself, not a version produced for television. When the cameras started rolling and she walked onto the stage, she was met with a warm round of applause from the audience. Many women were on their feet, applauding with tears in their eyes. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, but maintained her composure. The interview began with Diane carefully contextualizing the situation for those who didn't know all the details of the case that had shocked the nation. She showed edited clips of the viral video, always with extreme sensitivity, pausing to add context and avoiding replaying the most painful scenes unnecessarily. She meticulously explained who Sarah Miller was, her dedicated work at the foundation that helped vulnerable pregnant women, her academic background in social work, her tireless dedication to helping women facing the worst imaginable situations. "Sarah, before we talk about that night that changed your life, I would love for you to tell us, for the whole country watching, who you really are," Diane asked with genuine kindness, leaning slightly towards Sarah. "Because many people met you through a moment of deep pain, through one of the worst nights of your life, but you are so much more than that moment. You are so much more than that video." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of millions of eyes on her through the cameras, but she also felt the palpable support of the audience, of the women who were there specifically to hear her, to connect with her story. She began to speak, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. She told them about her childhood in Queens, about how her mother, Eleanor, had fought bravely to raise her and Michael alone after their father abandoned them when Sarah was just 8. She told them about how, as a 15-year-old teenager, she had witnessed a neighbor being violently abused by her husband while she was 7 months pregnant, and how no one in the neighborhood did anything to intervene, everyone pretending they didn't hear the screams, didn't see the bruises. "That marked me in a way I couldn't explain at the time," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion but still firm. "I saw that pregnant woman suffering, and everyone just looked away, as if what happened inside someone's house was nobody's business, as if a pregnant woman being abused was normal, acceptable, something we just ignored." She paused, looking at the audience. Many women nodded, recognizing the story in their own experiences or in stories they had heard. "Years later, after I graduated with a degree in social work from NYU, after I had worked in shelters and support homes, I decided to create my own foundation specifically for pregnant women," Sarah continued, "because I saw so many devastating stories of women abandoned at the most vulnerable time of their lives, of women beaten during pregnancy, of women humiliated and blamed for being pregnant, treated like an unwanted burden by their own partners. I wanted to create a place where these women would know with absolute certainty that they were not alone, a place where they could rebuild their lives with dignity. And over the last 7 years, our foundation has helped more than 5,000 women start over." The audience applauded spontaneously, and Diane smiled with genuine pride. "And then," Diane said carefully, her voice dropping a tone to mark the difficult transition, "you yourself became one of the women you dedicated your life to helping." The silence that fell over the studio was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. 300 people held their breath collectively. Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes, hot and inevitable, but she didn't hold them back this time. She let them fall freely down her face as she began to tell her personal story, the story she had kept locked away for so long. She told them about her marriage to Ethan, about how everything seemed perfect at first. She told them about the gradual changes in his behavior, the growing coldness, the derogatory comments disguised as jokes. She told them about the pregnancy, about how she thought a baby would bring them closer, but it only widened the chasm. "I was so focused on helping other women that I didn't realize I was a victim of emotional abuse myself," she confessed, her voice choked. "It's so much easier to see it in others than in ourselves. I convinced myself that everything was fine, that it was just a rough patch, that it would get better." Then she told them about that night, about how Ethan insisted she go to the event, saying it would be important for the family's image, about how she got dressed in the ivory dress, trying to feel beautiful even while pregnant and exhausted, about arriving at the hotel, Ethan's coldness, and then the woman in red. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Jessica poured the wine on her. "It wasn't just the wine," Sarah said, looking directly at the camera. "It was the deliberate humiliation. It was the look of satisfaction on her face. It was the silence of everyone around. But worse than all of that was looking at my husband, the father of my child, and seeing that he would do nothing, seeing that he was more concerned with the social embarrassment than with the pregnant mother of his child being assaulted. The audience was in absolute silence. Some women were crying openly. Diane had tears in her eyes but maintained her professional composure. And then came the revelation, Sarah continued, when they announced my name as the night's honoree. I was standing there covered in wine, humiliated, and at the same time being recognized for the work I had dedicated my entire life to. It was surreal. It was as if the universe was saying, "Look at the irony of it all." Diane leaned forward. "Sarah, after the video went viral, you received a multi-million-dollar settlement offer from Ethan in exchange for your silence. Why did you refuse?" Sarah looked at the audience, at the cameras, at all the people who were watching. "Because if I had taken that money in exchange for my silence, how many other women would continue to be emotionally battered in silence? How many would continue to think they have to accept it because their husband has money, because they have a child together, because society expects them to be compliant?" She paused, placing a hand on her belly. The baby kicked as if agreeing with her mother. "This isn't about revenge," Sarah stated with conviction. "It's about social awareness. It's about showing other women that they have a voice, that they deserve dignity, that they don't have to accept scraps of respect from anyone. It's about creating a world where my daughter won't have to go through what I went through." The audience erupted in applause. Many women stood up, some shouting words of support. It was a cathartic moment, not just for Sarah, but for all the women who saw themselves reflected in her. Diane let the emotion take over for a moment before continuing, "You know you'll have to face Ethan and Jessica in court. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to fight," Sarah answered, "not just for myself, but for all of us. For all the women who have been silenced, disbelieved, humiliated. This lawsuit isn't just mine. It's for all of us." The interview continued for another 40 minutes, with Sarah answering questions from the audience, receiving messages of support from other victims of psychological violence, and even taking live calls from psychologists and lawyers specializing in emotional abuse cases. When it finally ended, Sarah was exhausted but relieved. She had said everything she needed to say. She had exposed her truth without filters, without shame, and most importantly, she had given a voice to thousands of women who had never had the courage to speak. Backstage, as she was preparing to leave, she felt another contraction, this one stronger. She looked at the clock. The contractions were getting more regular. Could the baby be wanting to meet the world on this historic day? "I think my daughter wants to give her testimony too," Sarah joked with the production team, though a pang of nervousness hit her. Michael, who had watched the interview from the audience, approached quickly. "Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "The contractions are still spaced out, but I think today's the day." He hugged her tightly. "Then let's go home and get the bag. When it's time, we'll go to the hospital together." 3 hours later, the contractions were significantly closer and considerably more intense, waves of pain that started in her back and radiated forward, tightening her entire belly in rhythmic, powerful spasms. There was no longer any doubt. The baby was coming, and she was coming on that historic night. Michael rushed Sarah to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she had done all her prenatal care and where the medical team already knew her well. She was immediately taken to the maternity ward and then to a delivery room prepared especially for her. The medical team was fully prepared and extremely attentive. Her obstetrician, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman in her 50s with decades of delivery experience, greeted Sarah with an encouraging smile and eyes that conveyed absolute confidence. "Let's bring this little girl into the world together," she said, holding Sarah's hand with warmth and firmness. Nurses moved efficiently around her, checking monitors, adjusting equipment, preparing the room. Michael was by his sister's side, holding her hand whenever a contraction came, whispering words of encouragement, reminding her to breathe, to focus, that soon it would all be over, and she would be holding her daughter in her arms. The labor lasted 4 intense hours, 4 hours of pain, of superhuman effort, of moments when Sarah thought she couldn't go on. But every time she thought of giving up, she remembered everything she had been through, everything she had survived, everything she had overcome. If she had managed to face public humiliation, her husband's abandonment, the devastating betrayal, she could certainly bring her daughter into the world. And then, finally, at 10:17 p.m., on a day that would be remembered forever, while her interview was being broadcast live to millions of Americans across the country, Sarah gave birth to a perfectly healthy baby girl, weighing 7 pounds and 1 ounce and measuring 19 inches long. The baby's strong, vigorous cry filled the delivery room, a sound of pure, potent life that made Sarah cry along with her, from deep relief, overwhelming happiness, complete exhaustion, and instant, unconditional love. All the doctors and nurses smiled, that magical moment that never got old no matter how many times they witnessed it. "She's perfect, Sarah," Dr. Reed announced, her eyes shining with emotion. "Completely perfect and healthy. Congratulations, Mom." The baby was immediately placed on Sarah's chest, still connected by the umbilical cord that would be cut in moments. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered through the tears that wouldn't stop falling, holding her daughter for the first time with hands trembling with emotion. The baby had her mother's dark, bright eyes, a considerable tuft of dark, wet hair, and an adorable expression of curiosity on her small, pink face. She stopped crying as soon as she was placed on Sarah's warm chest, as if instinctively recognizing the sound of the heartbeat that had lulled her for 9 whole months inside the womb. Michael was beside them, his eyes misty. "What are you going to name her?" Sarah looked at her daughter, gently stroking her delicate face. "Amelia, after Grandma, so she grows up knowing she comes from a line of strong women." "Amelia," Michael repeated, smiling through his tears. "It's perfect." In the days that followed, the news of Amelia's birth spread quickly. Sarah's story, which had already touched millions, gained a thrilling final chapter. The mother who fought for dignity while carrying her child, and who gave birth on the same day she shared her story with the nation. Social media exploded with messages of support and celebration. Influencers shared the story, businesswomen offered support to Sarah's foundation, and thousands of women sent gifts and letters for little Amelia. Ethan, upon hearing of the birth, tried to visit the hospital, but Sarah refused his visit. She made it clear through Lauren that any contact with his daughter would have to be legally mediated and would only happen when she was ready. Ethan would have to prove he was worthy of being a father, not just claim the right by blood. Jessica and Catherine were formally charged with fraud and racketeering. The case against them was moving quickly, with several other men coming forward as victims. Justice was being served. A month after Amelia's birth, Sarah was at home, adjusting to the routine of a new mother. The baby was calm, slept well, ate well. It was as if she understood that her mother needed peace after so much turmoil. The foundation had received a significant increase in donations after the case's publicity. Michael had temporarily taken over administrative management, so Sarah could focus on motherhood, but she was already planning to return to work as soon as possible, this time with an even clearer mission. One sunny morning, Sarah was sitting in the nursing chair in Amelia's room, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in her crib. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the baby's perfect face. It was a moment of absolute peace. Her phone vibrated with a message from Lauren. "Sarah, the judge has accepted all our motions. The case against Ethan for document forgery will proceed. You have sole custody of Amelia. And the settlement for emotional distress has been set at a significant amount. You won." Sarah read the message several times, letting the words sink in. She had won. Not in the sense of defeating Ethan, but in the sense of reclaiming her dignity, her voice, her life. She had fought and won. But more than that, she had turned her pain into change. The foundation now had the resources to expand, to help even more women. Her case had inspired changes in laws protecting pregnant women. Companies were reviewing internal policies on emotional abuse and psychological harassment. A single night of humiliation had turned into a national movement. Amelia stirred in her crib, opening her little eyes for the first time since she had fallen asleep. Sarah stood up and picked her up, rocking her gently. "My little one," she whispered, "you were born in the middle of a storm, but you will grow up in the sun. You will grow up knowing that your mother fought, that she refused to be silenced, that she turned pain into strength. And you will grow up in a slightly better world, because women decided they would no longer accept scraps of respect." The baby looked at her mother with those deep, dark eyes, and Sarah swore she saw a smile form on her tiny lips. Outside, New York City continued its frantic routine. Cars honked, people rushed to appointments, life went on. But in that apartment, in that room lit by the morning sun, a mother and daughter were living a moment of peace, won through struggle, dignity, and courage. Sarah looked out the window, at the city that had witnessed her fall and her rise. She thought of all the women who were still fighting, who were still suffering in silence, who still believed they had no choice. And she promised herself, and the daughter in her arms, that she would keep fighting. Not just for them, but for everyone. Because a single act of cruelty, spilling wine on someone vulnerable, had become the trigger for the collapse of empires built on arrogance, contempt, and silence. And a single act of courage, refusing to be silenced and fighting for dignity, had become the foundation of a new world, where women no longer accepted being treated as less than they deserved. The story of Sarah and Amelia was just beginning, and it would be a story of strength, of love, of struggle, and of victory. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sarah and little Amelia has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain turned into strength, of humiliation turned into dignity, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most in this story. Did you identify with Sarah's struggle? Do you know someone who has been through a similar situation? Share your experience with us. Every day we bring intense and emotional stories like this one, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul, showing that even in the darkest moments, strength and courage can lead us to the light. We'll see you in the next episode, with another story that will make you reflect, feel, and believe that justice always prevails. Until then, remember, never accept scraps of respect. You deserve dignity, you deserve to be heard, you deserve to fight for your rights. A warm hug, and see you next time.